Hi, I'm John,
And I'm Meredith.
and this is No Talking in the Library. Today we're going to talk about, this is a weird sort of idea that we had when after we recorded the last one, where we were talking about movies and stuff that are sort of in popular culture or whatever, but that we haven't seen. So we came up with a little challenge for each other. And that
Yeah,
was
it's like watching movies that almost we missed. We'll judge, if you think that it's something that a canon film that maybe we should have seen by now.
Sure. So the one that Meredith watched, which I'll just sort of introduce, Pulp Fiction, which was released in 1994. I always sort of think of this as the movie that really made Quentin Tarantino famous. Obviously, Reservoir Dogs had come out 2 years before that, and he worked on True Romance even before that. And True Romance, actually, I didn't know who Quentin Tarantino was at the time. When you look back at it now, his influence on that movie is very obvious. But so Reservoir Dogs, an independent film that won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, got nominated for I think 7 Academy Awards, won Best Screenplay, has just an absolute raft of very talented people in it. John Travolta, Samuel L. Jackson, Ving Rhames. What is her name that I'm blanking on now?
Uma Thurman.
Uma Thurman. Oh God, losing it, but I can't remember Uma Thurman. This is what you'd have to call the sort of stereotypical Quentin Tarantino movie, certainly the one that very much defines his style. It's one of those movies that if you like this, you might as well just go ahead and watch the rest of his works, because this is, he has very many of the same elements. But yeah, so what did you think of this?
So I'm not completely unfamiliar with the works of Quentin Tarantino. I've seen Kill Bill 1 and 2. I've seen his segment of Grindhouse, the Death Proof. I've seen Inglourious Bastards, but I have never seen Pulp Fiction, and really never had an interest to. And all of those accolades that you've just listed, and the cast, all of that, and I did not enjoy a single moment of this movie.
I'm not totally surprised. It doesn't take very many of the boxes that I usually associate with things that you like, but speak of your dislike for the movie.
It's hard to say. Like, I know that this movie is often on lists of best of films. I'm pretty sure, I'm sure the critic Rotten Tomatoes score is very high. But man, it's really just like a 3-hour movie of like people talking about nothing. It really reminded me of that other terrible film you made me watch. I think it was called Ronin. Is that correct?
That is correct. Ronin at least had, I think, more car chases in it than. As a matter of fact,
I think. Well, both of the films have that sort of MacGuffin of a thing that you never learn what the thing is. And surprisingly, though, that the thing in Pulp Fiction didn't bother me as much as it did in Ronin. For whatever reason, I could not get over the fact that they never really articulated why all those people were together. And in Pulp Fiction, it almost didn't really matter because there was so much other things happening. But this movie is not chronological, which surprisingly I didn't know. I didn't really know anything about Pulp Fiction. I've seen the memes of John Travolta doing the thing, and I've seen him dancing with Uma Thurman, but I didn't really know what the movie was about. And so, that was fine. I've seen Insomnia, is that the name of the movie with? No, Insomnia is something else. The movie
Insomnia is the Stellan Skarsgård and.
Yeah, no, the movie, the guy.
The one about the guy who's
Memento.
Memento, the one that happens in reverse.
I've seen Memento. I'm not completely unfamiliar with like the idea of making the film out of order. Um, you probably know a little bit more. You've probably seen this movie more than I have. What do you think that's sort of doing? Like doing a film in vignettes that is eventually comes together to tell a whole story.
Well,
In
okay.
this
So number
case,
one, those of you who may have noticed me typing away a few seconds ago, that was because I was looking up the Rotten Tomato score, which is 91. Um, so this was not Tarantino's first foray into nonlinear storytelling. Those of you who've seen Reservoir Dogs will remember that there's a nonlinear element to that as well. And this movie was meant, as the title sort of suggests, to kind of homage to Pulp Fiction, like cheap detective novels, horrifically violent, but generally sort of linear in their storytelling that Tarantino clearly really loves. I think it's meant to kind of disrupt the narrative flow in a way that allows each scene to kind of appear on its own, if you will. So instead of having sort of the story of the two hitmen and the story of the boxer go along in parallel, you kind of see sort of moments, and it allows you or encourages you or forces you or whatever to focus on the individual moments rather than to allow yourself to kind of sink into the narrative easily or what have you. I mean, that's I think pretty clearly what it's supposed to do. I'll admit too, I'm not like a gigantic fan of Tarantino just because I don't know, partly it's so I saw Reservoir Dogs first, and just spoiler, in Reservoir Dogs, there's a scene where there's like a really gruesome torture scene that kind of turned me off the movie. I'm not like a terribly squeamish person, but this I really just was so difficult for me to watch that I now associate it with all his movies. I also get the feeling that Quentin Tarantino thinks he's like the smartest guy in the room, which is fine. There's lots of people in the world like that, except that the fact that he does sort of comes out in everything he makes. Everything he makes is like, I'm cool, here, check it out. And I
that's
find that
really like
off-putting.
the feeling I got from this movie was it really wasn't entertaining to me. It didn't really feel like it came together. Like when I finally got to the end, I wasn't like, oh wow, all those separate scenes. I finally feel like I put it together in my mind. It definitely felt like a film, like a substance over, oh no, sorry, a style over substance sort of film, like a film to make you feel
Right.
cool
Yeah,
rather than meaning anything.
it's really less than the sum of its parts, I think. Not in the way that Grindhouse was. I mean, Grindhouse really was like a cotton candy sandwich on Wonder Bread in terms of its substance. So if you weren't fascinated with the catastrophic violence, there just wasn't much there for you. The failing of a lot of Tarantino movies, and just to be clear, there's a lot of people that really love that movie. I mean, you don't get a 94 score on Rotten Tomatoes without having really made it with a lot of people, and that's super. This is one of those you can't really debate taste in a certain sense. It's the production values are very good. The acting performances are excellent. I mean, Ving Rhames. I love Ving Rhames in practically everything he's been in. He was really funny in Bringing Out the Dead, a movie that was otherwise kind of gruesome. But this movie I find sort of more annoying than entertaining, and I think that you found that on steroids.
Yeah, wasn't, surprised, pleasantly surprised to find that I enjoyed this movie. So it was, though, exactly what I expected it to be. There's that.
Certainly something to be said for that.
So the film I picked for you, we're going from something that is very well critically acclaimed, won many awards, often shown as like a peak example of the genre, to something that I'm looking here has a 27% Rotten Tomatoes score. And that is the 2002 film A Walk to Remember. So this is now the second Nicholas Sparks movie that we're discussing in this video. This was actually only the second Nicholas Sparks movie to be made. I was actually surprised. I thought it was after The Notebook, which I think in the time that has passed has sort of aged a little bit better in terms of critical opinion. I think The Notebook is really one of those Valentine's Day staples that people think of when, are looking for a romantic drama to watch. And there was like a certain sort of 6-year period in the sort of beginning to mid 2000s where they basically were releasing a Nicholas Sparks adaptation like every year until they just got so bad that I think they just stopped that tradition. So, John, what do you think of this movie?
It will come as a surprise to no one, not my normal fare, if you will. It's not that I have, I like a good coming of age movie. I'm a huge fan of a lot of Stand By Me. I think is a great movie, just to pick a coming of age movie out of the blue. When I was setting up to watch this movie, my wife came into the kitchen where I had it set up, and I was like, "Hey, I'm going to watch this movie for the podcast. Do you want to watch it with me?" And I can't even repeat the comment that she made before she headed back into the living room to watch like part of her marathon watching of every season of Grey's Anatomy. But it's, I think, actually a really, I was pleasantly surprised, I have to say. It's a young Mandy Moore who has since gone on to do a lot of really excellent work. And I can never remember Shane West. Shane West, what has he done anything since?
He was on ER for a stretch of time.
Right, who wasn't? But so the premise of this movie is that a bunch of kids in high school in North Carolina decide they're going to prank this other kid by having him dive into a sort of a quarry or some sort of pool or whatever. And he gets badly injured, and the sort of leader of the pack, played by Shane West, Landon Carter is his name, gets busted, ends up having to do kind of remedial work. So he has to do some kind of janitorial work, and he has to be in the school play, and he has to tutor. And he ends up meeting up with Mandy Moore, who's this pastor's daughter, Jamie Sullivan. She's slightly mousy. There's a scene right in the beginning of the movie where she's walking in the building and all the kids make fun of her. And it's one of those movies that really kind of takes you back. I suspect it really took you back a lot, having been a teenage girl, to what it was like to be in junior high school and high school, and it highlights a lot of, in a lot of ways, the kind of cruelty that goes on among kids of that age as they sort of try and figure things out or whatever. But it turns out it's a very touching love story, I think, about a kid who's really lost in a lot of ways and who finds himself through learning to relate to this other person, and they develop a romantic relationship. They end up getting married. Turns out that she has leukemia. This is kind of like The Fault in Our Stars. Like, it was as if like The Fault in Our Stars had to wait to be made until people had forgotten this movie. I think that I looked at the rating on Rotten Tomatoes before I watched it, just to sort of steel myself. But and I think that's actually a little unfair. I think the performances are very good. Jamie's father, is played by Peter Coyote, who completely randomly, it turns out, my mom went to college with in Iowa in the 1960s. Yeah, I was actually, this is not a movie that I would have like gone down to the media room and checked out if you hadn't prompted me in that direction. But it really was, I think, quite enjoyable. Part of it because I was sort of like, as I was watching, I'm like, this is why Meredith likes this. Oh yes, this is why Meredith likes it. So
I also think this movie it's no surprise, I love this movie. I watched it in theaters when I was in like middle school or something, whenever it came out. And it was Mandy Moore's sort of like first lead sort of starring role. And she sort of was the pop, she obviously started as a pop singer, as we all know, and she sort of came up around the same time as Britney Spears and Chicken of the Sea, Jessica Simpson. Her name just completely left my mind. But I really think that Mandy Moore has really shown an incredible range as both an actress and a singer. And I think she was always kind of my favorite. And it's been really nice to see her continue her career. She's got a wonderful role in This Is Us. Right now.
To real critical acclaim.
Yeah,
I think justifiably, although kind of depressing. But anyway, go ahead.
A great sort of guest role in Saved, that movie with Jenna Malone and Macaulay Culkin. You just never know when you're gonna see her in something. And I've enjoyed her music. So this was sort of her first big starring role. And the soundtrack is also, I really like, because it's a very heavy Mandy Moore, Switchfoot type of soundtrack, but I pretty much listened to it continuously for probably that year or two after the movie came out. And it's also interesting that you sort of started describing it as a coming of age film, because I think really most people think of it as sort of a saccharine, treacly, weepy, romantic drama. And I think that sort of really kept it from reaching a wider audience, because, again, Pulp Fiction, huge hit, people love it, but sort of romantic dramas have this sort of almost place that it's meant for a very certain type of sort of maybe housewife or teen girl. And unlike romantic comedies, I think have a better chance of becoming crossover hits, like Mean Girls, huge hit, Clueless. Those type of films have a better chance of sort of blowing up, whereas things stamped as, Nicholas Sparks weepy dramas kind of are starting behind the eight ball. Is that the right phrase?
Sure,
starting
yeah. At a disadvantage, certainly.
At a disadvantage, just from the get-go. When really, I think this is a wonderful movie. And again, I just rewatched it. I think has also aged quite well and is still very watchable.
You can focus on different parts of the movie as the sort of main thing, if you will. But one of the things I liked about the movie was the main character, who really starts out as a pretty terrible jerk, and someone who, there's that sort of conversation at the beginning with his mom, who's played by Daryl Hannah.
And like the worst wig.
Right, I know. That was, I have to admit, like the whoever did the costuming on this movie did not really cover themselves in glory with that. It's about this kid who really is empty. I mean, he doesn't, his relationship with his father is completely broken. He's basically the sort of leader of this group of kids who are all sort of messed up. There's that horrific scene where his ex-girlfriend or whatever decides to prank Mandy Moore by like photoshopping her face onto like a bikini model or something like that. And it's really, there's some things that are really like sort of cringe inducing because you remember stuff like that from being in school. But I kind of the thing I found interesting about the movie was this kid's arc. I mean, that he really had to sort of learn to get outside of himself and to be a different person than he was, and to find a reason to be a different person than he was. I thought that in a lot of ways that was kind of moving. I'm not like a huge, Nicholas Sparks fan. I'm really, by the way, impressed by the fact that you've read so many of the Nicholas Sparks books.
I've read every Nicholas Sparks book. It's my deepest, darkest secret.
Right. Sorry to out you on the internet for that, but you have no shame. So there we go.
Yeah.
But one thing that Nicholas Sparks does well is talk about sort of people's arcs, people changing from being one thing to being another, and how it is that we get from one place to another, be it a sort of comfortable place to somewhere uncomfortable or, being a kind of broken person to sort of finding redemption in some sort of way. And in that respect, I thought the story was actually kind of compelling, that really, this guy really does find a way to be a better human. And I thought kind of an entertaining story.
Well, you've heard it here first, folks. A Walk to Remember is a better movie than Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, well, so while we still have some credibility, maybe we should leave it there. But thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.